Can you believe in faith that the devil is the good guy and God the bad guy? Or more to the point, can you believe something in faith that is wrong? Stick around for the answer. Hello, my name is Father Ambrose Little, and I teach philosophy at the Dominican House of Studies. Welcome to Aquinas 101, Big Questions, Little Answers, the series where I do my best to answer your big questions about philosophy, theology, and more. Today we have a question about faith, presented in the form of an objection. One viewer asks, can you believe something that is false on faith? For example, can you believe that Satan is actually the good guy and that God is the evil one based on faith? If so, then faith can't be a way to know the truth. There are a couple of points that we can tease out of this question/objection. First, this question is responding to our video on faith, where we talk about faith as a kind of knowledge and a way to truth. Truth, according to St. Thomas and other Aristotelians, is something that we cannot be wrong about when we obtain it through a proper demonstration. In these cases, it is impossible to be wrong about what we know. Our viewer implies by this question that if we grasp a truth, then we know it scientifically. That is not necessarily the case. We can understand true things without knowing them scientifically. So if we believe something that is true just because it is true does not mean that we grasp it scientifically. We can understand it with something that is less than scientific certitude. But that's not the troublesome part of the question. It seems possible that we can believe something on faith that is false. For instance, there are people out there who sincerely believe it is right to worship the devil. Because they, quote, believe this false idea, it seems that faith is not really a path to truth, but can be a path both to truth and falsehood. The first response to this worry is to note that faith and belief are not the same thing. In everyday speech, we tend to conflate the two, and for good reason. We talk about how we believe in God, and such a belief is clearly an act of faith. We also talk about the leap of faith, which implies a jump into the unknown that we hope will end up all right. However, belief is different from the gift of faith. While these common associations with everyday belief have some truth to them, it is not the case that theological faith is the same thing as ordinary belief in things we can't know for sure. We come to accept ordinary beliefs because they seem plausible to us. We look at the evidence on both sides of the question, and then we make our best guess for what we think is true. That is belief properly so called. If there is not a lot of evidence for something, St. Thomas calls the belief an opinion. Because beliefs and opinions are things that we can be wrong about, these are the types of judgment that can possibly lead some individuals to extremely wrong beliefs, like worshiping the devil and other hideous things of that sort. They come to these conclusions through many wrong human judgments. It is precisely because of this terrible possibility that we at Aquinas 101 say, it matters what you think. It really does matter, because it has an effect on your eternal salvation. But neither of these natural beliefs and opinions are the same thing as the faith we receive from God, because faith, true faith, is not simply an act of the human will deciding to accept something that is uncertain. The faith that comes from God is described by St. Thomas and others as a light that illumines the mind and helps us to see what we can't see by nature, but that God sees. When we see things with the light that comes from God, we cannot help but see true things, even if we do not know why they are true. As St. Thomas says, quote, the faithful know the things of faith, not as by demonstration, but by the light of faith which makes them see that they ought to believe them. End quote. So we may not understand why God is a Trinity. We nevertheless know that we ought to believe he is a Trinity of persons by the light and impetus of faith. That being said, it can be difficult at times to distinguish between things that are known by the light of faith and convictions that come from ordinary human beliefs. This is why St. Thomas and the Church refer to faith as a habit or a virtue. Faith is a gift from God. Habits and virtues are things we grow into through use. The more we see through and reflect in light of faith, the more we will become familiar with faith's light, so that we can recognize when it is at work more clearly. This takes much time and grace to come to use well, but when we do develop the habit of faith, it becomes easier to distinguish when something is an ordinary human belief and when something is commanded to be believed by faith. With all this in mind, we can see that the light of faith will never permit us to see the devil as the good guy and God as the bad guy, because that would mean that the light of faith, that is the light that comes from God himself, is making us see God as evil and evil as good, which is impossible. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Big Questions, Little Answers. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, may God bless you and keep you in his grace. I hope that answers all your questions, but if not, please let us know by submitting your big questions using #AskAFriar in the YouTube comments and on social media. And don't forget to like and share with your friends, because it matters what you think.